My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 29 years old, and 3 days ago, while I was lighting birthday candles in my own backyard and trying to keep frosting off my son's little hands, the man who cut me off at 15 walked through my gate like he still had a place in my life. I hadn't seen him in years. Not on birthdays, not at graduation, not when I got married, not when my son was born. But somehow, on the one afternoon that was supposed to belong to my child, he decided to show up uninvited and act like time had erased everything. At 15, I learned exactly how easy it was for a parent to look at you and decide you were no longer their responsibility. He did not slam a door in rage, he did something colder than that. He made me feel disposable, like I was a bill he no longer wanted to pay. Like I was something he could set down and never come back for. I spent years building a life that had nothing to do with him. A safe life, a steady life, the kind of life I once begged for and never got. So when I saw him standing there near the balloons and paper plates, watching my son laugh like he belonged in that picture, something inside me went completely still. I stayed calm longer than most people would have. I let him speak. I let him pretend. And then he said why he was really there. It had nothing to do with love, nothing to do with regret. By the time he threatened to sue me for $50,000, all I felt was clarity. When I told him he had 5 minutes to leave, I meant every second of it. Before I tell you exactly what he wanted and how that birthday turned into the day he finally lost whatever power he thought he still had over me, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I really want to see how far this story reaches. When I was 15, I stopped believing that adults always meant what they said when they called something temporary. My parents had already been divorced for a while by then, and my father had spent months acting like I was one more loose end left over from a life he wanted to forget. He had a newer house, a newer routine, a newer woman, and a newer version of himself that somehow had no room for the daughter he had helped bring into the world. I kept telling myself it would settle down. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself he would calm down and remember I was still a kid. Then one Thursday night in October, he stood in the kitchen with his car keys in one hand and a travel mug in the other, and told me I needed to start figuring things out on my own because he was done carrying me. He said it the way people talk about canceling a subscription they no longer use. No yelling, no guilt, no apology. Just a clean, cold decision. I remember staring at him and thinking that if he had screamed, it would have hurt less. At least then it would have sounded emotional. But he was calm. Calm like I had become an inconvenience he was relieved to remove. I asked where I was supposed to go. He said I was smart enough to figure it out. I asked if he was serious. He said I was old enough to stop acting helpless. I asked about school, about clothes, about money, about the fact that I was 15 and could not legally do half the things he was acting like I should suddenly handle. He just shrugged and told me I had always been dramatic. That was the night I learned that being unwanted can sound quieter than you expect. He gave me a deadline. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to get my things together, stop making his life difficult, and disappear into whatever future I could scrape together for myself. I slept maybe 2 hours that night. The next day at school, I sat through algebra, American history, and lunch like I was moving underwater. I did not tell anyone at first because saying it out loud would make it real. But by the second day, I broke down in the parking lot after school, and my best friend found me crying so hard I could barely breathe. I told her enough for her to understand what was happening, and that one conversation changed my life. Her parents did something my own father would not do. They listened. They asked questions. They looked shocked in the right places. And then they said I could stay with them until we figured things out. I still remember how embarrassed I felt carrying my duffel bag into their guest room. I kept saying thank you too much. I kept promising I would not be a burden. I kept waiting for someone to change their mind. Nobody did. I finished high school from that house. I got a part-time job at a coffee shop a few blocks from campus and worked evenings and weekends. I learned how to smile through exhaustion, how to count tips fast, how to hide heartbreak behind routine. The Parkers never treated me like charity. They treated me like a teenager who deserved structure, dinner, and a safe place to sleep. That sounds basic until you grow up without it. My father never called to check if I got to school. Never asked if I needed winter boots. Never came to a parent meeting. Never texted on birthdays unless it benefited him to pretend he cared. Once or twice he sent a message that said things like, "Hope you are doing well." And even those felt less like love than image management. By the time I turned 18, I had stopped waiting for him to become someone else. I took community college classes because it was what I could afford. I transferred later. I built my life one practical choice at a time. I did not get rescued. I got disciplined. I got sharper. I got very good at surviving disappointment. The thing about growing up that way is that you become careful with joy. You do not assume good things will stay. You learn to protect them. That is why what happened at my son's birthday hit me the way it did. It was never just about a party. It was about the fact that I had spent 14 years building the exact kind of safe life my father once acted like I did not deserve. By the time I was in my 20s, survival had finally started turning into stability. I transferred from community college to the University of Colorado, finished my degree, and eventually became a school counselor. Maybe that job makes perfect sense if you know my story. Kids can tell when you are the kind of adult who means it when you say you are there for them. Families in crisis can tell too. I was not interested in being impressive. I just wanted to become the kind of steady person I once needed. Somewhere in those years, I met Evan. We met because his niece came to an after-school family event I helped organize, and he stayed late stacking folding chairs instead of leaving the work to me and two exhausted teachers. He was funny without trying too hard, patient without making a performance out of it, and the first man I had ever known who made reliability look effortless. When I told him about my father, he did not rush to give advice or tell me I should forgive and move on. He just said that what happened to me was wrong and that nobody should have had to earn basic care that young. I knew I loved him before I admitted it to myself. We got married 4 years later on a windy Saturday in Colorado with close friends, the Parkers, and a small group of people who felt like real family. My father was not there. He had not been invited. I did not miss him. Then Milo came along, all curls and laughter and endless questions. He is 5 now, and every birthday with him feels like proof that love can grow in places where fear used to live. Our house is not huge, but it is warm. It has scraped kitchen chairs, a backyard with uneven grass, toys that somehow migrate into every room, and the kind of noise I used to dream about when I was younger and lonely. On the morning of the party, Evan was at the grill by 11, flipping burgers and hot dogs while music played through a portable speaker on the patio table. I was tying balloons to the fence and trying to keep Milo from sneaking frosting off the cake before guests arrived. There were juice boxes in a cooler, paper plates stacked on the outdoor table, and one of those giant inflatable slides that make kids lose their minds the second they see it. It was simple, loud, a little chaotic, and perfect. Our neighbors came. A couple of parents from Milo's daycare came. 2 of my coworkers brought their kids. Chloe Parker arrived with a bag full of gift wrap and the exact same amused smile she had worn since we were teenagers. Linda hugged me so tightly I nearly cried, and Greg carried folding chairs like he had been assigned to party logistics by the universe. That is what I mean when I say chosen family. The people who stayed. The people who built with you. The people who never once made you audition for care, A few months before that party, I had noticed something strange online. My father had found one of my public family photos and hit like on it. Then another. Then another. No message. No explanation. Just those tiny digital footprints that felt more invasive than affectionate. I ignored them. I had no interest in reopening a door that had taken me years to seal shut. A cousin I barely spoke to later sent me a vague message asking how I had been and whether I still lived in the Denver area. That felt connected too. I ignored that as well. I had learned a long time ago that when people from that side of the family suddenly remembered I existed, it usually meant they wanted something. Still, I did not think he would actually show up. Even selfish people tend to understand that a child's birthday party is not the place to stage a return. I gave him too much credit. Around 1:30, while kids were racing across the yard and parents were laughing near the grill, the side gate creaked open. I looked over because something in me tightened before I even fully saw him. He looked older, of course. More gray at the temples, deeper lines around the mouth, a little heavier through the middle, but I knew him immediately. My father stood there in the middle of my backyard holding a gift bag with cartoon tissue paper like that made him belong. For one strange second, everything kept moving exactly as before. A child screamed with laughter on the slide. Someone asked Evan where he bought the grill. A paper napkin blew across the grass. And then my father smiled at my son like he had every right in the world to be there. I did not run toward him. I did not make a scene. Years earlier, I might have frozen or panicked, but motherhood changed something in me. When you have a child, your fear becomes less interesting than your instincts. My first thought was not about closure or anger. It was about control. How close was he to Milo? How many people were watching? Whether he would behave like a normal person for 5 minutes or ruin the day the second he opened his mouth. He lifted the gift bag slightly, like a peace offering, and said, "There she is." Then he looked past me at Milo and added, "And there is my grandson." Those words landed wrong immediately, not because they were technically untrue, but because of the entitlement wrapped around them. He did not ask. He claimed. Evan had already noticed the shift in my face. He walked over from the grill, rested a hand lightly against my back, and said hello in that calm voice of his that can either welcome you or warn you depending on what you have earned. My father introduced himself like we were all meeting under normal circumstances. He acted as if 14 years of neglect were just a rough patch the family had naturally outgrown. He told Evan he was happy for us, told me he had been meaning to reach out, told us traffic had been worse than expected, which would have been a bizarre thing to say if he had actually been invited. I remember thinking that some people lie so often they start sounding casual, even when they are trespassing emotionally and physically. I told Milo to stay by the slide with his friends and walked a few steps away from the crowd. Evan came with me, but I shook my head once, very slightly. Not because I wanted to handle it alone, but because I wanted to see how far my father would go when he thought he still had access to me. He followed me toward the far corner of the yard near the fence where the noise of the party softened just enough for private words. Up close, I could smell cheap cologne and stale stress. He gave me a quick once-over, the kind that was meant to say he was evaluating the life I had built and deciding what it was worth to him. Then he switched into a voice I recognized from long ago, the reasonable voice. The one he used when he wanted to make cruelty sound practical. He said he knew I was upset and that he understood I had always been sensitive, but he hoped enough time had passed for me to stop holding grudges. I almost laughed at that. Grudges are what you hold over small wounds. What he had done was not small. He said he had heard I was doing well. Nice house, good husband, good neighborhood. He even said I looked happy, and for a second I wondered if he was capable of hearing how transactional every sentence sounded. Then he got to the point. He said he was in a tight spot financially and needed my help. Not a little help. Not a temporary favor. $50,000. He said it quickly, like the faster he said the number, the more reasonable it would sound. I thought I had misheard him. I asked him to repeat it, and he did, this time with extra details. A business deal had gone bad. Partners had turned on him. The market was brutal. He had obligations. He needed to move fast. I just stared at him. He took my silence as an opening and kept going. He said I was in a position to do something meaningful for him now. Meaningful. That word still makes my skin crawl. Then, because apparently greed was not ugly enough on its own, he decided to dress it up as history. He reminded me that he had paid for a roof over my head when I was younger, that he had fed me, that raising a child cost money and sacrifice, and that maybe now it was my turn to give something back. I felt my body go very still. I asked him if he was seriously standing in my backyard during my son's birthday party, trying to charge me retroactively for having existed as his daughter. He frowned like I was twisting his meaning. He said I was getting emotional. He said he was only asking for what was fair. Then he lowered his voice and made the mistake that changed everything. He told me that if I did not help him willingly, he was prepared to pursue other options, legal options. He said there were family matters I did not want dragged into court. He said it casually, but the threat was clear. Something in my chest settled at that moment. Not softened. Settled. The confusion disappeared. The tiny part of me that had wondered whether age had humbled him died right there near the fence with children laughing 30 feet away. I looked him in the eye and said, "You have 5 minutes to leave my property." He blinked at me, surprised that I had not argued or pleaded or tried to negotiate. Then he gave me a smile I had seen before, back when I was young enough to think adults with that smile must know something I did not. It was the smile of a person who believes pressure always works eventually. He leaned a little closer and said, "Naomi, do not do this in front of your little family," as if he had any right to use those words, as if my home existed for his leverage. I repeated myself. 5 minutes. His smile disappeared. He should have left then. Any decent person would have. Even a selfish person with half a survival instinct would have realized that he had miscalculated and backed away before the damage became permanent. But my father had always confused access with authority. He glanced toward the patio where Milo was showing another little boy one of his new toy trucks, then back at me. And I could almost see the math working behind his eyes. He thought the crowd gave him power. He thought my need to protect the mood of the party would make me flexible. He thought being a child's grandfather, at least biologically, gave him a role no one could fully deny. He was wrong on all 3 counts. He said we needed to talk inside where it was quieter. I said no. He took a step toward the back door anyway. Not fast, not dramatic. Just deliberate enough to tell me he had decided my boundaries were negotiable. I moved in front of him. He told me to stop acting insane. I told him to leave. He said I was overreacting because he had asked for a loan and that any decent daughter would hear her father out. I remember the exact heat of the sun on the side of my face and the smell of charcoal from the grill, and how surreal it was to stand there in a birthday dress while the man who abandoned me tried to bully his way deeper into my life. Evan started toward us the second he saw my father angle toward the house. Chloe noticed too. I could feel eyes lifting from every corner of the yard, that subtle shift when people sense adult tension and stop pretending not to. My father realized he had an audience, and instead of backing off, he straightened his shoulders like a man preparing a performance. He said loud enough for Evan to hear that he was only trying to have a private conversation with his daughter and did not appreciate being treated like a criminal. That was when I understood he was trying to trap me in my own good manners. If I kept my voice low, he could act wronged. If I raised it, he could act frightened. If I walked away, he could drift toward Milo and start introducing himself as Grandpa to anyone who would listen. There are moments in life when you realize that staying polite is just another way of surrendering. He tried to step around me again. I grabbed his wrist and stopped him hard. Not to hurt him, not to punish him, to stop him, to make it physically impossible for him to take one more step toward my child or my home. His skin was thinner than I remembered. He jerked in surprise. I held on and said, very clearly, "Do not take another step. You have 5 minutes to get out of this yard before I call the police." A few nearby conversations died instantly. Evan was beside me now, not touching me, just present. Solid. Ready. My father's face went red. He told me to let go. I did not. He tried to twist free too quickly and winced. Later, when he finally pulled back, there was already dark color blooming where my fingers had been. He looked down at his wrist like he had discovered a gift from heaven. Proof. Something he could point to and weaponize. He started saying I had assaulted him, saying he had only come to make peace, saying I was unstable. All that really did was confirm exactly who he was to every adult standing close enough to hear. Chloe spoke first. She said, "Nobody here is confused about what is happening." One of my coworkers stepped closer to Milo and quietly redirected the kids toward the slide. Greg Parker, who had once carried my duffel bag into his house when I was 15, stood up from his folding chair with the slow calm of a man who did not need to raise his voice to end nonsense. My father looked around and realized the room he thought he could control did not exist. It was only a backyard, yes, but it was my backyard, full of people who knew me, and that mattered more than blood ever had. Evan told him to leave immediately. My father pointed at me and said, "This was not over." He said I would regret humiliating him. He said if I wanted to play hardball, I had no idea what was coming. Then he backed toward the gate, still clutching the wrist he had nearly torn out of my hand himself, and left with every ounce of dignity he still had dissolving in the grass behind him. The gate slammed. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own pulse. Then life, unbelievably, started moving again. Someone turned the music down. Someone else asked if I wanted water. Milo ran over asking if it was time for cake and whether the grown-ups were done talking. That almost broke me. I smiled at him because children should not have to carry adult poison when they are still sticky with icing and sunlight. We cut the cake. We sang. We opened presents. I made it through the rest of the afternoon on pure instinct. But the air had changed. The party did not collapse, yet it was no longer innocent. After the last guests left and the backyard was a graveyard of paper cups, torn wrapping paper, and half-deflated balloons, I sat at the kitchen table with Evan and finally told him everything I had not had the words to say earlier. Not just what my father wanted. All of it. The old coldness. The 2-week deadline when I was 15. The years of silence. The messages that had recently started. The way the threat felt less like a surprise than a pattern returning in a new suit. Evan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. He said, "He is never coming near Milo again." I nodded, but I still did not fully understand how far my father was willing to go until 2 days later, when I opened the mailbox and found an envelope from a law office with my name typed across the front. I knew before I opened it that it would be bad. Some instincts do not come from anxiety, they come from experience. The letter inside was from an attorney representing my father, and it accused me of withholding $50,000 that allegedly belonged to him through prior family assets and undocumented financial arrangements. That phrase alone was ridiculous enough to make me laugh once, sharply, in the driveway. Undocumented financial arrangements. In other words, fiction with legal formatting. But the rest of the letter was less funny. It claimed he was prepared to pursue the matter formally if I did not cooperate. It suggested damages. It implied deceit. It was written in that polished, bloodless language designed to make nonsense sound expensive. I stood there with the envelope in my hand and felt the last thread of hesitation burn away. Up until then, part of me had still hoped the party confrontation had been a final outburst from a desperate man. Ugly, yes, but isolated. Something he would regret and retreat from once he understood I would not fold. Instead, he doubled down. He found a lawyer willing to type lies onto official paper and mail them to the woman he had once left to fend for herself at 15. I took the letter inside and put it on the counter without speaking. Evan read it, then looked at me with the kind of calm anger that makes quiet men frightening. He did not say, "Maybe we should ignore it." He did not say, "Perhaps your father is just hurting." He said, "We are getting a lawyer today." By noon, we had a consultation scheduled with Andrea Flores, a sharp, practical attorney in Denver who came recommended by one of Evan's coworkers. I liked her within 5 minutes because she did not waste a second romanticizing family conflict. She read the letter, asked a few clarifying questions, and said exactly what I needed to hear. This is weak. This is sloppy. And this is not about law. This is about intimidation. She told us that people like my father often counted on emotional history to do the work evidence could not. They assumed shame, fatigue, and fear would push the other person into a settlement just to make the problem disappear. She also said something else that mattered. She told me the bruised wrist would not save him if the larger facts showed trespass, harassment, and coercive conduct. Then she asked whether I had any records from my teenage years. At first I thought the answer was no. Then memory started opening drawers I had kept closed. I still had old emails from school. I still had a scanned emergency contact form that listed Chloe's parents, not my father. I had tax documents from my early jobs. I had college aid paperwork showing no parental support. I had old messages from a cousin talking about how everyone knew he had basically started over and left me to deal with myself. Chloe had memories. Linda had memories. Greg had memories. Suddenly the story was not just pain, it was documentation. Over the next 48 hours, our dining room turned into a paper battlefield. I made folders. I printed timelines. Andrea helped organize everything into what mattered and what did not. We were not trying to tell the world my whole life story. We were building a clear wall of facts that made my father's claim look exactly as absurd as it was. And while we were doing that, he started calling from blocked numbers. Not constantly, but enough. Voicemails, too. The first one was self-righteous. The second sounded almost pleading. By the third, he was furious, saying I was forcing this and that I should have just helped him like family helps family. Andrea told me to save every single one. One message in particular mattered. In it, he said he had hoped he would not have to bring lawyers into it, but that I had left him no choice after embarrassing him in front of everybody. There it was. The truth, almost in his own words. The legal threat was not about money he believed was his. It was retaliation because I had refused him publicly, and he had lost face. Andrea smiled when she heard that voicemail. She said it would not win the whole case by itself, but it did reveal motive beautifully. Around the same time, word about the party began moving quietly through our circle. Not because I ran around telling the story dramatically, but because that is what happens when adults witness something disturbing at a child's birthday party, and then compare notes afterward. One of the daycare moms texted to ask if I was okay. A neighbor offered to give a statement if needed. Chloe was furious in the way only old, loyal friends can be furious on your behalf. She said my father had looked exactly like the kind of man who still believed he could scare women into compliance if he kept talking long enough. I wish I could say all of that made me feel instantly powerful. It did not. It made me tired. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being dragged back into an old role you fought hard to outgrow. For a couple nights, after Milo was asleep, I stood in his doorway longer than usual, watching his chest rise and fall, and promising myself that the chaos would stop with me. Evan found me there once and asked if I was okay. I said yes, but he knew better. He wrapped an arm around me and said something simple. He said, "You are not 15 anymore, Naomi." That mattered because he was right. At 15, I had survived by taking what scraps of safety other people were kind enough to offer me. At 29, I had a voice, a home, legal representation, and people who loved me without conditions. So when Andrea suggested we send a formal response rejecting every claim and warning them against further harassment, I said yes, immediately. When she also suggested that, if necessary, we could go one step further and make the truth harder for him to hide, I said yes to that too. My father wanted a fight built on pressure and secrecy. He was about to get one built on evidence. Andrea's response letter went out on a Friday morning. It rejected the claim completely, demanded that all further contact go through counsel, noted the lack of legal foundation, and made it clear that if my father continued harassing my family, we were prepared to escalate. For the first time since he had walked into my backyard, I felt something close to relief. Not because the situation was over yet, but because it had finally moved out of the shadows where men like him do their best work. Still, I knew my father. He hated losing privately almost as much as he hated losing publicly. So before he could twist the story into something useful, I made a decision that would have terrified the 15-year-old version of me. I told the truth. Not in a screaming post. Not in a messy rant. Just the truth. I wrote a calm, direct account for my personal Facebook page explaining that the man who had cut me off as a teenager had appeared uninvited at my son's birthday party, demanded $50,000, threatened legal action when I refused, and was now pursuing a false claim after years of abandoning any real parental responsibility. I did not exaggerate. I did not insult him. I did not tell people what to think. I attached nothing private about my son. I just told the truth the way adults tell it when they are finally done being afraid of how ugly it makes someone else look. Then I logged out and put my phone face down on the table. The response started faster than I expected. Friends from college commented first, then neighbors, then people from the school community, then people who had known pieces of the story for years, but never all of it at once. A few messages hit especially hard. One came from a mother I barely knew who said she was glad my son would grow up seeing what healthy boundaries looked like. Another came from a former student, now in college, who said she still remembered me telling her that love without safety is not real love. I sat there reading those words with tears in my eyes because sometimes the lessons you spend years teaching other people are the very ones you still have to choose for yourself. By that evening, extended relatives had started reaching out too. Not all of them kindly. A few wanted me to take the post down because family matters should stay private. That argument has always amused me. People love privacy when the truth embarrasses the wrong person. But some relatives, including two I had not spoken to in years, admitted they were not shocked. One even said my father had burned bridges with half the people around him over money and pride, long before he came for me. Then came the consequence he never saw coming. The woman he had built his latest life around contacted me privately. Her message was short, stunned, and careful. She said she had known our relationship was strained, but she had not understood the depth of what he had done, and she certainly had not known about the lawsuit threat over money. She thanked me for being factual. A week later, I heard through Andrea that my father's side wanted to quietly discuss dismissal. Quietly. That word again. This time, it was our turn not to play along. Andrea insisted on a full withdrawal and written confirmation that no further claims would be pursued. She also pushed for reimbursement of certain legal costs tied to the frivolous filing. They resisted at first. Then they folded. There was no case. There had never been a case. There was only ego, desperation, and the mistaken belief that I would still behave like the scared girl he once dismissed with 2 weeks' notice. The claim was withdrawn. The letters stopped. The block number calls stopped. And because his pride could not bear the social damage spreading through his own circles, my father did one last thing I never thought I would see. He posted a public statement pretending he regretted misunderstandings and wished our family peace. It was not a real apology. It was a reputation bandage. But by then, it did not matter. People knew. His wrist had healed by then, but his image had not. Several relatives distanced themselves from him. A business contact he had bragged about apparently backed away after hearing enough to question his judgment. The woman in his life left. Most importantly, he lost access to the fantasy that he could walk back into my world and be treated like a father simply because he shared my blood. He was done, not because I screamed louder than he did, but because I stopped protecting him from the consequences of who he had always been. Life settled after that. Not overnight, but steadily. Evan and I took one evening a week just for us after Milo went to bed. No legal talk allowed. Chloe still jokes that she wishes she had charged admission to the worst birthday cameo in Colorado. Linda keeps reminding me that asking for help is not weakness, which I am finally starting to believe. Milo is still Milo. He remembers the balloons, the cake, the slide, and the toy trucks. He does not remember the man at the gate, and I intend to keep it that way for as long as I can. The lesson in all of this is not that revenge has to be loud to be satisfying. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand still, tell the truth, and refuse to let someone rewrite the damage they caused just because time has passed. Family is not defined by who made you. It is defined by who protected you, who stayed, who told you that you mattered when it would have been easier to walk away. Setting boundaries is not cruel. It is not selfish. It is not disrespectful. Sometimes boundaries are the most loving thing a parent can build because they protect the children who come next from inheriting pain that was never theirs to carry. I used to think my father had taken something from me that I would spend the rest of my life trying to replace. Now I know he did something else. He taught me, by negative example, exactly what kind of home I would never allow around my son. And if there is any value in a story like mine, maybe it is this. You are allowed to close the door on people who only remember you when they need something. You are allowed to choose peace over guilt. You are allowed to build a life so honest and healthy that the people who once broke you no longer recognize the strength standing in front of them.